Okay, up next we have Noel Hacegaba, Deputy Executive Director for the Port of Long Beach, who will be discussing Port Outlook. Come on up, Noel.
Hey, Rick, how are you? Great to see you. Do you know where the clicker is? Wait. Well, good morning. There we are. How's everybody doing? It's great to be here. I always appreciate the opportunity to provide this short port outlook, but I can't start without making a comment about this amazing milestone. 10 years. Can you believe that? This supply chain summit has been around for 10 years. How many of you were here for the inaugural supply chain summit? All right. See, and they're sitting towards the front. There's a correlation there. That's what we call survivors, the pioneers. But you know, it really is an amazing feat when you consider how much this global supply chain summit has grown. Thanks again to the leadership of Nick, the team. I have the pleasure of serving on the board alongside Carl and Stephanie and so many others, and it's a very exciting time here at USC. So as I was preparing my port outlook for today, I was reflecting on the last 10 years and how much the supply chain has changed. And when you're as close to the supply chain as all of us are, sometimes it's a little hard to take notice of the changes, right? It's sort of like when you look at your picture from 10 years ago, unless you look at a picture from 10 years ago, you don't notice that you're changing, right? It happens to me every time I see my headshot, by the way. I said, that's what I looked like 10 years ago. But when you talk about the supply chain, I think it's fair to say that there has been a lot of change. At the Port of Long Beach 10 years ago, we were in the beginning stages of what we called the Big Ship Ready campaign. And at the time, it was all about getting our port ready for the big ships, anything beyond 4,500, 5,000, 6,000 TEU. And we were just beginning this massive CapEx program that ended up being to the tune of $4.5 billion. Thank you very much. See, this is what we call just-in-time logistics. And at the time, that year, the Port of Long Beach processed just over 6 million TEU, which at the time was a lot. Well, let me show you where we were just last year. We were over 50% of where we were 10 years ago. Now that's a lot of cargo. 9.4 million TEU to be exact, a record for us. But the amazing thing is that the cargo surge that began in July of 2020 carried us through 2021 and has not let up. As you'll see on this slide, through the first half of 2022, we're already ahead by 5% of our record pace last year. Now, I'm a realist, I'm an optimist, but I'm a realist. As much as I'd like for the Port of Long Beach to pierce the 10 million TEU mark for the first time ever, I'm a realist, and I believe that we're gonna end just shy of that. Not 10 million, but probably in the vicinity of 9.7 million TEU, but that's nothing to sneeze at. So as I was reflecting on the theme for this year, supply chain reimagined, delivering resilience, agility, efficiency, and sustainability, let me share with you what the Port of Long Beach is doing to do our part in the delivery of these important elements. The last 24 months is a good starting point. Let me walk you down the narrative. That import surge that I referenced earlier that began in the summer of 2020, it hasn't let up. And the COVID stay-at-home orders and the shift in consumer spending catapulted us and the entire supply chain to record imports. So much so that the warehouses and the distribution centers were fully packed. In fact, at one point earlier this year, there were 109 ships at anchor, a record. And by the way, that's 109 above normal. And these ships were effectively serving as warehouses on water because of the lack of warehouse capacity. At the terminals, at the ports, containers were piling up in record numbers. They were spending much longer there on the terminals, sometimes 4, in some cases 5, 6, 7 times longer than usual pre-pandemic normal. And that created all sorts of effects. How many have heard of the chassis shortage? Well, chassis were in short supply as well, because now chassis were serving as makeshift warehouses, parked along the perimeter of these warehouses in DCs. But the pandemic also exacerbated a lot of the trends that were already in motion pre-pandemic. We talk a lot about the driver shortage. That was already around before COVID, but it was made worse. The warehouse worker shortage is still a real issue, and it's still a real problem. I mention these things because for organizations like ours, like a landlord port authority, we were forced way out of our comfort zone. We were forced to be agile to respond to the supply chain crisis. Let me give you some examples. In 2020, when we went through that sudden shift of record blank sailings to record number of ships, and it happened on a turn of a dime, you'd be surprised how many shippers came to us. The railroads came to us and said, how come we didn't see that coming? It caught the entire supply chain off guard. So our team, and many of my colleagues are here, Port of Long Beach Tables, they went to work and started gathering a lot of data that we never collected before. And our terminals and our partners willingly offered the data. We make it available now on our website. You can check it out for yourselves, polb.com, and you'll see that we have mountains of data that we make available to do our part to give you some of that visibility. One of the most popular features of our website is what we call the wave report, to give week-to-week visibility to our shipping lines and all of our partners about what's coming, what's on the water, what's on the ships, and so that they can prepare accordingly. But in addition to that, we had to make sure that our waterfront workers were safe, they felt secure, and they showed up to work. So we went out and we procured a PPE in massive quantities. We opened up a test site. We ended up administering over 25,000 COVID tests, landlord port authority, mind you. And we also created the first of its kind vessel vaccination program for vessel crew members. And in the end, we actually administered over 10,000 vaccinations. Now, again, that's not our core competency. We're not in the business of doing that, but we had to do it. That's what we call agility. Another way we were agile is we realized that we had to act immediately to try to compensate for the lack of capacity in the warehouses. Our terminals were getting extremely densified. So we started identifying vacant spots of land around the port. We started with this one that you see on the screen, 20 acres, back in the fall of 2020. And we made it available for temporary storage and staging. How many of you have ever heard of pop-up yards, by the way? Yeah? This was the first pop-up yard. We opened this up before they were known as pop-up yards, right? We call it STORE, short-term overflow resource. Today, this site has grown from 20 acres to 100 acres. It has an annual throughput capacity of over 1 million TEU. So think of this as a terminal just next to a terminal in all of our terminals, and it's creating it's been quite a success story. But in addition to being agile, we had to be resilient. So one of the other things we did in response to the supply chain crisis is we worked with our terminals and we urged them to expand their hours of operation. What you see here on this image is a news clipping from the week that TTI, one of our terminals, announced that they were going 24-hour operations, 4 days a week. They were the first, and they're still the only ones. But today, every terminal across the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles have expanded their hours of operation. They're open on weekends, they're open at nights, and everyone's doing their part to make sure that they're injecting some of that capacity to enable that fluidity that we need to keep containers moving. But not every action we took was popular. We knew that we had to use every tool in our toolkit, and that included a fee. Now, I will tell you that when we first announced the fee, there were a lot of nasty emails and nasty text messages and nasty phone calls and threats. Not illegal threats, just threats. But you know what? This fee actually worked. When we noticed that over half of all the containers on terminal had been there 9 days or longer, we knew we had to do something about it. We knew that we had to urge our shippers with the help of our shipping lines to help get those aging containers out. And you know what? As you can see here on this slide, it's worked. In fact, it's been so successful, we haven't actually had to implement the fee. And as you can see here, if you look at the box on the bottom right, you'll see that red number. That's the percentage of those boxes on terminal that have been reduced in response to the announcement of this fee. Now, I will tell you that earlier this year, in February, March timeframe, that number was a lot better. At one point, it reached minus 67%. Now it's about 23%, but it's still having its intended effect. Now, there's still a lot of work to do. How many of you have heard of the rail congestion? Okay. The inland rail yards, talk about getting caught off guard and getting caught flat-footed. The rail system, which was already out of balance, already short-staffed, was hit with this massive shift to what we call IPI, intermodal container business. And that means that as soon as a ship comes to the port and the box is discharged, it goes straight onto a train. Well, that worked out great in concept on paper, but when you have the inland rail yards congested, it has this upstream effect. And as a result of that, you can see here on this chart that the average rail dwell, the average number of days that an intermodal rail container spends at a terminal in LA and Long Beach, 13.3 days. Now, those are not the records we want to set. Containers should be in motion, right? Containers should be moving. There ought to be fluidity, and we're working very, very hard with our railroads. Our team here and myself, we're in daily touch with them, urging them, helping them, prodding them along. They've been under the microscope by the Surface Transportation Board, DOT, and other federal agencies. But again, it's everyone doing their part to ensure that we have the agility and the resiliency. Now, at some point, hopefully soon, we're gonna move past this rail crisis. At some point, that 13.3-day average is going to come down to normal, which is about 2.53 days. And so we're already planning for the future. What I mean by that is, in fact, I'm going to skip these ugly charts. We're already planning for the future because we believe that even in crises, you continue to build, you continue to plan, and you continue to execute on your strategic plans to prepare the supply chain for the future. So over the next 10 years, we're on track to invest $2.6 billion. That's our CapEx program. And the centerpiece of that is what we call the Pier B on-dock rail support facility. Think of it this way. We are building the largest intermodal rail container yard inside the Port of Long Beach. It's going to support all of our terminals in Long Beach and will also support the operations at the Port of Los Angeles. This is going to be a tremendous boost to the Southern California Gateway and will help us move many, many more containers directly on train in the years ahead. Price tag, $1.5 billion. Okay? Now recently, just last fall, we got the good news that we were awarded a $53 million grant thanks to the Department of Transportation. And here you see Secretary Buttigieg mentioning the Port of Long Beach, mentioning this project, because even though it's going to be built and located in the Port of Long Beach, because all the cargo that enters the Southern California Gateway touches all 435 congressional districts, the benefits really fall across the entire nation. And the only thing I would say to our friends at DOT is if we could have 30 more of those grants, we would greatly appreciate it. Because these projects are not cheap. They're very expensive. But thankfully, with all the attention that the supply chain has gotten in recent years, you know, the supply chain historically has been invisible, under the radar. No one really thought about it. They would go to the store and they would buy a product that said, you know, made in Taiwan or made in Japan or made in South Korea, made in China. And no one would really think about how that product got there to that store shelf. But when you see 109 ships at anchor, when you see all the containers piling up, when you hear about Christmas being threatened because of the supply chain disruption, the elected leaders and the policymakers take notice. Thankfully, ports went from being unknown to infamous to semi-famous because this historic amount of funding that the federal government has unleashed to throw at the goods movement system, at supply chain, is just staggering. $1.2 trillion. How many of you know how many zeros go after the two? That's a massive number. $1.2 trillion. And that's going to support the supply chain of the future and projects like ours. But in addition to that, the state of California is not far behind. In their current state budget that went into effect in July of this year, the governor just signed a budget that includes $2.3 billion for goods movement, another record number, desperately needed. Some people would say very late, long overdue. I would agree with that, but the important thing is that they're here, right? And they are willing partners and they're willing to work with us, and very, very encouraged by that. Projects like that and investments like that will help us prepare for the supply chain of the future. And some of the projects that don't get the attention the way that some of these infrastructure projects are projects like these. In partnership with the Port of Los Angeles, the ILWU, and the PMA, thanks to funding from the state of California, we're going to build a state-of-the-art workforce training center for goods movement. And it's going to emphasize all waterfront jobs and all jobs in supply chain. Believe it or not, here in Southern California, the nation's largest gateway, we don't have a training facility the way that ports in Vancouver, north of us, or other ports around the country. But projects like these will ensure that our supply chains are resilient in the years ahead by ensuring that we have the human capital that's trained and adequately prepared to handle the technology of the future to ensure that we have that fluidity in that technology. Speaking of technology, we just heard from our friend at Honeywell and some of the advances there. The technology is changing, it's disrupting, but it's transforming the supply chain, I believe, in a very positive way. At the Port of Long Beach, we're doing our part too. Just last December, we announced our latest initiative. We call it the Supply Chain Information Highway. Can you all say that with me? Supply Chain Information Highway. It's not the superhighway. It's the information highway. And what this is, it's a piece of infrastructure, right? If you look at this chart, think of all the data transfers, data transactions that take place for a single container on any given day, any given shift at the port. Massive amounts of data gets exchanged. Now imagine if we were able to harness the power of all those data exchanges and have the technology that liberates the data so that shippers and shipping lines and all of our partners had that advanced visibility so they could properly plan and they could properly schedule all their operations to optimize those handoffs between modes and industries. Imagine what we could accomplish together. And so think of this as a digital highway that enables all cargo visibility tools currently in existence in the market today, both from the public and the private sector, and their data to be able to travel on one common corridor, okay? I'm just gonna drop some names, just to drop names. I'm not endorsing any of them, but you've heard of them. CargoSmart, TradeLens, Port Optimizer, eModal, all these cargo visibility tools, all these platforms that carry data. Imagine if they all travel on one common highway so that shippers can go to one and access the data. And as you can see on this slide, the idea is for it to offer maximum flexibility. Whatever format that the source has, this cloud-secured environment will be able to ingest it, and then it will be able to provide the data on a profile basis to the appropriate users based on their profile and credentials in a format that works for them. So this will serve not just the big shippers that we all love, but it will also help the mid-sized and the small mom and pop shops that route 1, 2, 3 containers a year. It's going to be just very flexible to help everybody. But it will also, we also envision it to be coast to coast. So since December, we've already enlisted the support, and 5 other port authorities have agreed to join us. One of them is here. Hi, Andy. Port of Oakland was our first partner, the Utah Inland Port Authority. We signed up Port Miami, South Carolina Ports Authority, and the Northwest Seaport Alliance. And again, the vision here is very simple: end-to-end visibility, coast-to-coast connectivity. And the whole idea is to create a data sharing environment where each gateway and each port has their own local data environment, and they serve as on-ramps to this highway. And by the way, I should have mentioned, but one of the neat features about this, if you look at the last bullet point, what's your favorite price? Right? So we're listing this at your favorite price. We don't think we should ask you for data and then charge you for it, right? So we want to make it free to the shippers. So anyway, more to come on that in the years ahead. But finally, I talked about agility, talked about resilience, talked about efficiency, and can't end this without talking about sustainability. When we talk about the advances in technology and how data exchange and technology is helping us optimize operations, reduce the costs of transferring cargo, moving cargo, whether it's the costs associated with visibility or tracking, there's another side of that coin, and that is sustainability. Because the more efficient we can make the supply chain, the more sustainable it will be, the greener it will be. And this is why the 2 ports in Southern California joined forces years ago. And we continue to push the envelope year after year to ensure that goods that move through Southern California are moved in a green way. And the latest version of that is our Clean Air Action Plan that has 2 very ambitious goals: zero emissions cargo handling equipment by the year 2030, and then zero emissions trucks by the year 2035. Now you say, well, how on earth are you going to get there? We don't know exactly how, but we know we will, because we set the targets. And in the past, every time the ports have come together and we've announced these very aggressive, ambitious goals, our industry partners have always stepped up. And remember the funding that I talked about earlier from the federal and the state government? That's going to help. It's going to go a long way to ensure that our industry partners are ready to do that. And by the way, we commend our shipping line partners and our railroads because they're already doing that on their own. How many of you have heard of zero emissions ships and decarbonization goals? They're leading the way as well. So we feel very good about these goals and the ability of the industry to join us. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I was given a very short window, and I wanted to make sure I didn't go over. Wink. Any time for Q&A, or is that it? Yes. Is it? Okay. All right. We can take Q&A. Okay, fantastic. All right. That's assuming we have questions, right? And assuming I have answers. But anyone have any questions or answers? Yes, sir. Hey. Hey, how are you?
So LA Long Beach is part of the solution as you're presenting with the bottlenecks of moving IPI from Asia to Chicago, let's say. Using Chicago as an example, what's being done there, because that's half the problem. You can ship it out of here, but if the rail, Norfolk Southern or another railroad can't move it to Chicago because it's congested, it's of no use. So if you can elaborate on that, that'll be appreciated. Thank you.
I appreciate the question. I sort of touched on it in the interest of time, moved on, but when I was talking about the upstream effects, right, when the inland rail yards, whether it's Chicago or Alliance in Texas, some of these key inland rail points, when they get congested, there's an upstream effect. That's the root cause. That's the reason we have intermodal boxes piling up in our terminals. Today, in LA Long Beach, there's about 40,000 boats, right, which is about 4 to 5 times what is normal. So the solution is going to take time. One of the reasons we're in this predicament is because of the lack of westbound and eastbound balance. We need the equipment here, but that equipment can't come empty, right? It needs to bring something to the West Coast. But in addition to that, the railroads who had to scale down in response to the pandemic, and they had to furlough and lay employees off, are having a hard time, just like every other industry, to scale back up very quickly. And it's taking them much, much longer. In fact, I was a victim, not of the railroads, but the airlines. I was supposed to land here at 8 p.m. yesterday. 2 flight cancellations and 3 flight delays later, I got here. And the reason that last flight was delayed 3 times is because they were 1 flight attendant short. Now, if that's what we see happening on the airlines, imagine the railroads. And then you have to train them. You have to make sure that they have the skills. So the short answer to your excellent question is we have to do a better job of working together, the ocean carriers, the shippers, and the railroads, to huddle and make sure that we're not continuing to dig ourselves into that hole by continuing to move more boxes into these inland points when they're so congested. The other thing is that the railroads also need to do a better job of coordinating in the trenches and making sure that they're working with the shippers to make sure that the shippers have the resources and the equipment they need to pull those boxes out as well. So it really is all about coordinating better in the trenches.